Time to read Chapter 9 of The Deep End by Traci Abramson. We're just going through it now, aren't we? Matt poured himself a glass of milk, wondering where CJ could possibly be. Doug's note said everyone was okay, but working his way through 12 long innings that night had been pure agony when all he wanted to do was find out what was going on with his wife. He hurried to the door when the doorbell finally rang, opening it to find Keith Toblin standing in the hall alone. "Where's Doug?" Matt asked, stepping aside to let Keith inside the condo. Keith waited for him to close the door before he answered. "He's on his way to see CJ." "Where might that be?" Matt asked, his body tensing. "She's been relocated," Keith said simply, not knowing an easy way to break the news. "She got away, but Malloy found her at the swim meet." "Jimmy Malloy, as in the man that had her old boyfriend killed?" "That's the one," Keith nodded. "We're still not sure how he found her, except that he must have been monitoring any new swimmers making cuts to the Olympic trials. Her time from her first meet must have alerted them as to what name she was using, and they tracked her down when she registered for the second meet." "You've got to relocate me with her." "No chance, Matt," Keith said firmly. "You are too well known, and if you suddenly quit baseball, we would have Malloy looking for you along with every sports reporter in the country." Matt paced the length of the room and then turned back to face Keith. "I can't stand sitting idly by when my wife needs protection. Whether you like it or not, that's my job too. And whether you like it or not, you are not an easy man to hide." Keith leaned on the edge of the couch. "Your picture has been in and out of newspapers and magazines consistently since you were 15 years old, and that was before you became a big-time baseball star." Matt changed tactics as the truth pierced through him. "Look, I don't know if she can handle another separation. It's bad enough that she's trying to make the Olympic Games without a coach." "We're working on the coaching problem," Keith replied. He moved toward the door. "I've got to get going. I just wanted to let you know that she's safe. She'll have a new alias, but Doug said he's going to keep her initials CJ to make things easier on her." I'm surprised they would do that. Usually you have to change your name every time. Also, I hope you're enjoying the rain. Okay. Matt nodded in understanding, then asked wearily, "Can you at least tell me where she is?" "Let's just say that Doug is going to keep a close eye on her. In fact, I imagine they will be neighbors within a week or two." He took a business card out of his jacket pocket. "Here's my phone number. I'm going to be your main point of contact from here on out. Make sure you let me know if an opportunity opens up for you to be traded. I might have some ideas of which team would suit you well." Matt looked down at the card. It provided Keith's name and phone number, but no other identifying information. He glanced back at Keith. "I'll do that." Doug circled the block twice before pulling into the apartment complex's parking lot. His flight from Philadelphia to Miami had been uneventful and thankfully on time. He didn't have to look at his watch to know that it was nearly midnight, yet he knew he wouldn't be able to relax until he checked in with CJ and inspected the temporary safe house. He knew exactly where he wanted her staying for the next several weeks, but some security and minor modifications were underway and wouldn't be completed until the next day at the earliest. He knocked twice before using his key to open the door to the first-floor apartment. Despite the lateness of the hour, he was not surprised to see that everyone was still up. He held a large paper bag in one hand, and the scent of Chinese food quickly permeated the kitchen. Lacey was currently on watch, standing by the window so he could scan the road and parking lot. Tara sat in the living room watching a movie, and CJ was sitting at the kitchen table tapping away on a laptop. "I picked up some takeout. I figured it would be a while since you've eaten," Doug told Tara, nodding a greeting to CJ, who had finally looked up from the computer where she was searching the internet. "Thanks." Tara stood and crossed to the kitchen table where Doug sat down on the food. "How are you holding up?" Doug asked, CJ moving so that he could see the computer screen over her shoulder. "I'm alright." Worry showed in her eyes when she turned to look at him. "Did you see Matt?" "His game ran late, so I had to leave to catch my flight." Doug put a reassuring hand on her. Keith was going to meet him after the game and let him know what's going on. "Isn't there any way I can at least talk to him on the phone?" CJ asked early. "I'm sorry, CJ. You know we can't take the chance. It's common knowledge that Matt lives in Philadelphia. Now that Russia's men know that you were living there too, we don't want to risk them connecting the two of you. We already know how good they are at tapping phone lines." Doug noticed the paper CJ had been writing on, and he moved closer to read her notes. "What have you got here?" CJ let out a little sigh and tapped a finger on the notepad in front of her. "I made a list of the meets I can still use to qualify for the Olympic trials." Let's take a look. Resignation tinted his voice as Doug took the paper from her scanning gun list. Several of these are on the same weekend. I know. CJ pushed back from the table and stood so that she could see the list. I actually had an idea I wanted to run past you. Doug nodded to the food. Let's eat. You can tell me about it over dinner. 20 minutes later, Doug pulled his computer out of the case and sat down next to work. CJ's idea was risky, but he thought he might be able to make it work. The next major swim meet was only a week away in Los Angeles. CJ proposed that she register late and only swim the 100-meter breaststroke. If she failed to make her qualifying time, she would have another chance a few weeks later at the end of May. 3 major swim meets were scheduled on the same weekend, 1 in Texas, 2 in California. CJ suggested that she register for each of the meets. If anything suspicious surfaced, she could move from one meet to another, giving her the opportunity to swim both the 100-meter breaststroke and the 200-meter individual medley in different meets if necessary. She even promised to scratch out the semifinals and finals of the events when she made her qualifying times. CJ's plan would allow her the opportunity to qualify for the Olympic trials, but first Doug had to make sure she would compete safely. He had every intention of registering CJ in the next meet, but he wasn't going to let her anywhere near the pool. Instead, he hoped he could lay a trap in Los Angeles and take care of the men after her. Even if Doug wasn't successful in LA, the possibility of Malloy tracing CJ through race results when Doug did let her compete would be difficult if she only competed in 1 or 2 events per meet and used a different alias for each one. Doug was just beginning to think he might be able to pull it off until he saw CJ's notes at the bottom of the page. His eyebrows lifted as he realized she had timed everything so that she could swim in California at the same time Matt's team would be there for a series against the Dodgers. Doug looked across the table at CJ. He was staring at her laptop, scrutinizing the online results from her husband's game. CJ, you don't really think that we can let you see Matt in LA, do you? Come on, Doug. It's perfect. CJ stayed leaning back in her chair. We're not even sure that Russia's men know that Matt and I are still together. You can't even really think that they're following him around the country looking for me. I didn't think Russia's men were monitoring hotel reservations or swimming websites to look for you either, Doug retorted. He shook his head. I'm sorry, but there's just no way. CJ stared at him for a moment, her jaw set. Look, I appreciate everything you've done for me, but I need to see my husband. She closed the laptop and stood up. With or without your protection, I'm going to see him in LA. CJ. Before he could finish, CJ started across the room. She refused to even look at Doug as she mumbled, I'm going to bed. Doug watched CJ close the door, surprised to hear her make such demands. He didn't think she would really risk her cover to see Matt, but the threat alone revealed her desperation and vulnerability. The only other time she had absolutely insisted on something was when she and Matt decided to get married. Doug knew her well enough to realize that this was her way of taking control of her emotional well-being in a situation where she felt powerless. Doug glanced over at the bedroom door and thought of the plans he had already set in motion to help CJ prepare for the Olympics. Now he could only pray that he could keep her safe and that all of their hard work would be worth it. Pete Wellman looked over the swimming pool, wondering what he had gotten himself into. 32 years ago, he had earned his one and only gold medal at the Olympic Games in the 400-meter individual medley. Now here he was, only 3 months into retirement, and the U.S. Marshals were begging him to help them out with some charity case. His posture and presence still exuded the confidence of a Marine colonel, his graying hair cut military short and his shrewd dark eyes taking in everything around him. Though a few extra pounds had tried to take permanent residence around his middle, he stubbornly fought them off by running 5 miles each morning. He thought of his wife at home, still asleep in bed, and wondered what possessed him to make this trip. He told himself that it was a sense of duty that had caused him to drive the 45 miles out of Miami at the crack of dawn to take a look at this kid the Marshals were protecting. If he himself thought about it, he might admit that he was intrigued by the girl's story. His security clearance was high enough that he had been given the basics when Lacey had contacted him a couple of days before. The girl was the only witness in a high-profile case, and the man she was testifying against had already tried several times to kill her. Pete had only read a few pages of her file before developing an intense hatred for Chris Rush. The girl was supposed to be a good swimmer. The security had kept her from high-level meets that would have told him just how good. Lacey walked into the pool area, extending a hand when he closed the distance between them. Thanks for making the time to come out today. I'm here. Let's see what you got. She'll be right out, Lacey said. A moment later, a female marshal emerged from the locker room, followed by a slender brunette. She wasn't more than 5'6", short for a serious competitor as she came closer. Pete's first impression was that she should be looking into an acting career instead of training for the Olympics. She was a very attractive young woman. Lacey made the introductions, and when Pete shook CJ's hand, he was surprised at her firm grip. When Pete continued to study her silently, Tara stepped in and took over. CJ, why don't you go start your workout? We have a few things we need to go over with Pete. Okay, CJ nodded and moved to the side of the pool. She put on her cap, stepped in with a minimal splash, and adjusted her goggles. A moment later, she pushed off and began her warm-up. At least she's not a slacker, Pete thought to himself as CJ proceeded to swim. Her strokes were long and efficient for someone of her size, and her strength and power beneath the surface helped negate her height disadvantage. He glanced at his watch, pleased at the time it took for her to complete the first part of her warm-up. When she began a series of individual medleys, he watched approvingly. Her butterfly was solid, probably good enough to make a trial cut, but not beyond. Her backstroke was generally efficient, though Pete immediately saw a couple minor adjustments he would make if he were coaching her. When she made her turn into the breaststroke, Pete's eyes widened. She simply exploded off the wall. Without thinking, Pete stepped closer to the side of the pool, studying CJ's stroke. She had more of a dolphin motion than was allowed back when he had competed, but he couldn't see anything of significance he would change. He watched her swim 3 IMs before he turned back to Tara and Lacey. Lacey just grinned. I told you she was good. Here's the paperwork on the event she already qualified in. Tara handed him the file folder. Pete flipped it open, seeing that her time was decent, maybe good enough to make the Olympic team. He turned back to watch CJ and shook his head. Her stroke is more suited to swimming the 100 breaststroke. We might want to put her in the IMs too. See where she comes in. Does that mean you're interested? Pete didn't answer. Instead, jotting down a few notes of instruction on the notepad he held, he tore off the top page and handed it to Lacey. Here's what I'll need. We'll start tomorrow, 4 a.m. Ooh. And next time, we'll start Chapter 10. Thanks so much for sticking around. I hope you enjoyed Chapter 9, and I'll see you next time. Much love.